The entire dining room of the Gilded Lily, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, went deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Caleb Al-Fayed, the oil tycoon who could buy and sell everyone in the room, stood frozen. His face, usually a mask of arrogant fury, had turned a ghostly pale. He stared at the trembling waitress, Audrey, as if she were a ghost. She hadn't just spilled water. She had just answered his secret, encrypted phone call in a language he thought no one here understood, and she just saved his life. He thought she was a nobody. He was about to find out she was the only one who could destroy him. The rain in New York City didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Audrey Miller adjusted the collar of her stiff, uncomfortable uniform and checked her reflection in the darkened window of the Gilded Lily. She looked tired. At 24, she had the eyes of someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes, all of them exhausting. "Audrey, stop admiring yourself and get table 4 prepped. The VIPs are arriving in 10 minutes. The voice belonged to Clive, the floor manager. Clive was a man who believed that kindness was a business expense he couldn't afford. He snapped his fingers near Audrey's face, the sharp sound echoing in the empty prep area. "I'm on it, Clive. Just fixing my name tag," Audrey said, her voice steady despite the pounding headache behind her eyes. "Make sure you are," Clive sneered, checking his Rolex, a knockoff he tried to pass off as real. "We have a high-priority guest tonight. Caleb Al-Fayed. He owns half the skyline, and rumor is he's looking for a reason to buy this block and bulldoze it. If you mess this up, you're not just fired, Audrey. I'll make sure you never work in this zip code again." Audrey nodded, keeping her head down. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her apartment in Queens was the size of a shoebox, and her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had already slid a red notice under her door this morning. She needed the tips. She needed the abuse. She needed to be invisible. That was the irony of her life. Once Audrey hadn't been invisible. 6 years ago, she had been Audrey Sterling, daughter of Richard Sterling, a diplomat stationed in the Middle East. She had grown up in the glittering high-rises of Dubai and the historic streets of Cairo. She had attended private galas where deals worth billions were signed over tea. But that life had evaporated overnight when her father was framed for corporate espionage he didn't commit. The scandal destroyed him, took their money, and left Audrey with nothing but a fake last name and a terrified need to hide from the powerful enemies who had ruined her family. Now, she wasn't the diplomat's brilliant daughter. She was just the waitress with the fraying shoes. The restaurant doors swung open, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if the air had been sucked out. 3 large bodyguards in black suits entered first, scanning the room with earpieces buzzing. Then he walked in. Caleb Al-Fayed. He was strikingly handsome, in a terrifying way. He wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Audrey made in 5 years. His jaw was sharp, his eyes dark and restless, scanning the room not with appreciation, but with the boredom of a man who owned everything he saw. He didn't wait to be seated. He simply walked to the best table by the window, ignoring the reserved sign. Clive scrambled over, sweating. "Mr. Al-Fayed, what an honor! We have prepared." Caleb didn't even look at him. He held up a hand, silencing the manager. He was already on his phone, speaking rapidly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Clive froze, humiliated, then turned his panic onto Audrey. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard. "You," he hissed. "Take him the sparkling water. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look him in the eye. He's in a mood." Audrey took the crystal tray. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced them to still. She had faced worse men than Caleb Al-Fayed. She took a deep breath, put on her invisible mask, and walked into the lion's den. As Audrey approached the table, the tension radiating from Caleb was palpable. He wasn't just angry, he was cornered. He was hunched over the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. He wasn't speaking English. Audrey's ears pricked up. The guttural melodic sounds of the Arabic dialect were familiar to her, comforting even. It was the Gulf dialect, Khaliji, specifically with the sharp intonation of someone from the upper echelons of Saudi business. "La, anta la tafham," Caleb hissed into the phone. No, you do not understand. The contract is void if the shipment doesn't clear customs in Jeddah by midnight. They are holding my assets. Audrey placed the water glass down with the precision of a surgeon, trying to make zero noise. Caleb didn't acknowledge her. He didn't even see her. To him, she was furniture. "They are demanding a bribe, brother," Caleb continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that Audrey could hear perfectly. "The Port Authority director. He knows about the shadow account. If he exposes that transaction, I lose the merger with the Americans. I lose everything." Audrey froze for a split second. She knew that term. The shadow account. It was a specific financial loophole used in international shipping law, a loophole her father had written a thesis on, a loophole that, if mishandled, looked exactly like money laundering. "Water," Caleb snapped in English, not looking up. Audrey poured. She should have walked away. She should have gone back to the safety of the kitchen where Clive was pacing. But something in Caleb's voice triggered a memory. He wasn't the villain here. He was being played. The person on the other end of the line was feeding him bad information. "Tell him I will pay double," Caleb shouted into the phone in Arabic, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. The entire restaurant looked over. Clive started marching toward the table, looking ready to apologize profusely, and perhaps fire Audrey just to show he was doing something. "It's a trap, Caleb." The voice on the other end, audible only to Caleb, must have said something negative, because Caleb looked ready to throw the phone through the window. "I have no choice. Transfer the funds." Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. If he transferred those funds to the Port Authority while under audit, he would be flagging himself for a federal crime. It was exactly how her father had been framed. The pattern was identical. She couldn't help it. The injustice of it burned her throat. "More water," Caleb barked at her in English, finally looking at her with eyes full of contempt. "And tell your manager to clear the room. I need privacy to fix your incompetence." It was the insult that did it. The arrogance. He assumed she was stupid because she wore an apron. He assumed she was deaf to his world because she was serving him water. Audrey finished pouring. She didn't retreat. She stood up straight, her spine locking into the posture of the diplomat's daughter she used to be. Clive was 5 feet away, his mouth open to yell at her. "Sir," Audrey said softly. Caleb glared at her. "I said leave." Audrey didn't switch to English. She looked him dead in the eye, and in perfect, fluent, aristocratic Arabic, she spoke. "Do not transfer the money. Sayyidi, sir." Caleb dropped his phone. It clattered onto the fine china plate, cracking the screen. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. Caleb stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The furious billionaire looked, for the first time, completely stunned. "Excuse me?" he whispered in Arabic, testing her. Audrey didn't back down. She replied in the same dialect, her accent flawless. "The Port Authority director isn't asking for a bribe. He is stalling you so the midnight deadline passes. If you transfer the money now, it will be flagged as a bribe, and they will seize your assets in New York, not Jeddah. You are being baited." Caleb slowly stood up. He towered over her. The rest of the restaurant watched in confusion. seeing only a waitress standing toe-to-toe with a titan, speaking a language that sounded like a secret code. "Who are you?" Caleb demanded in English, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and shock. "Who sent you? Are you a spy?" Clive finally reached the table. He grabbed Audrey by the shoulder, roughly pulling her back. "I am so sorry, Mr. Al-Fayed. This girl is deranged. She is fired immediately. Get your things, Audrey. Get out!" "Don't touch her," Caleb said. The command was quiet, but it had the force of a bullet. Clive froze, his hand hovering over Audrey's shoulder. "Sir?" Caleb ignored the manager. He walked around the table, ignoring his bodyguards who had stepped forward. He stopped inches from Audrey, looking at her name tag, then up to her eyes. He was searching for something. Fear, deceit, a wire. "You just heard a conversation that could get you killed," Caleb said, his voice low. "And then you gave me legal advice on a multi-million-dollar maritime deal." "I gave you correct advice," Audrey said, switching back to English, her chin held high. "Check the maritime logs for the Al-Hada ship. You'll see it's already docked. They're lying to you." Caleb stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then he picked up his cracked phone. He dialed a number, his eyes never leaving Audrey's face. "Check the logs," he ordered his assistant. A pause. "It's docked? And the hold?" Another pause. Caleb's eyes widened. "Cancel the transfer. Freeze the accounts." He hung up. He looked at Audrey as if she were a diamond found in a pile of coal. "You were right," he breathed. "You just saved me $20 million. Clive let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Well, isn't that lucky? As I said, Audrey is one of our unique staff members." "Quiet," Caleb snapped without looking at him. He focused entirely on Audrey. "A waitress at the Gilded Lily does not speak that dialect of Arabic, and she certainly doesn't know maritime law. What is your real name?" Audrey swallowed hard. This was the danger zone. If she gave her real name, her enemies might find her. But if she lied to a man like Caleb Al-Fayed now, he would tear her life apart just to find the truth. "My name is Audrey Miller," she lied, but her voice wavered. Caleb narrowed his eyes. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "I don't believe you, Miss Miller. And I don't believe in coincidences. You're coming with me." "Excuse me?" Audrey stepped back, bumping into Clive. "You know too much," Caleb said, buttoning his jacket. "And you have a skill set I suddenly find myself in desperate need of. You're done serving tables." He turned to Clive. "She quits. Put her final check on my tab." "I didn't agree to this," Audrey protested, panic rising. Caleb leaned in, his voice a velvet threat. "You know about the shadow account, which means I can't let you walk out of here. You either come with me as a consultant, or my security team detains you until we figure out who you're working for. Your choice, Audrey." Audrey looked at the door, then at Caleb's intense, dark eyes. She realized with a sinking feeling that her invisible life was over. "Fine," she whispered. "Good," Caleb smirked, the arrogance returning. "Let's go. We have a contract to rewrite." The interior of Caleb Al-Fayed's limousine was quieter than a tomb and twice as cold. The windows were tinted so heavily that the rainy streets of Manhattan were reduced to grey blurs, isolating them completely from the world outside. Audrey sat on the edge of the pristine leather seat, clutching her purse. It contained a subway card with $4 on it, a half-eaten granola bar, and the fake ID that had kept her safe for 6 years. Across from her, Caleb sat with his legs crossed, typing furiously on a tablet. He hadn't spoken a word since he practically shoved her into the car. The silence was a tactic. Audrey knew it. Her father had taught her that powerful men used silence to make their opponents crumble, to make them fill the void with nervous confessions. But Audrey wasn't going to crumble. She looked out the window, her jaw set. "Stop pretending to look at the scenery," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the air without him looking up. "You're calculating your escape. You're wondering if you can open the door at 40 miles per hour. Audrey turned to him. "Actually, I was wondering why a man worth billions has a car that smells like cheap pine air freshener. It's inconsistent with your brand." Caleb stopped typing. He looked up, his dark eyes narrowing. For a second he looked annoyed, and then a flicker of amusement crossed his face. "My niece was in here yesterday. She spilled a bottle of perfume. I tried to mask it." "It didn't work," Audrey said flatly. "You have a sharp tongue for a waitress," Caleb noted, placing the tablet down. The playfulness vanished, replaced by the steeliness of a predator. "And you have an education that doesn't match your resume. I had my security team run a preliminary check on Audrey Miller while we were walking to the car." Audrey's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her face impassive. And you don't exist," Caleb said softly. "Oh, there's an Audrey Miller, born in Ohio, but she died in a car accident 4 years ago. You're using a ghost's social security number, which brings me back to my question. Who are you?" "I'm someone who just saved you from a federal indictment," Audrey parried. "Doesn't that earn me a little privacy?" "In my world, privacy is a luxury you buy with loyalty." Caleb leaned forward, his knees almost brushing hers. The proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of expensive scotch and rain. "You are going to help me fix this mess with the Jeddah merger. We are going to my penthouse. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, so strict that if you even whisper my name in your sleep, my lawyers will own your dreams. And then you're going to explain how you know about the shadow account loophole." "I read a lot," Audrey said. "Don't lie to me," Caleb warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "That loophole was theoretical. It was outlined in a thesis written by a disgraced diplomat named Richard Sterling 10 years ago. It's not light reading." Hearing her father's name hit Audrey like a physical blow. She dug her fingernails into her palms to keep from flinching. Caleb was smarter than she had anticipated. He wasn't just a rich playboy. He was a shark who did his homework. "I studied pre-law before." "Life happened," Audrey said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Sterling's case was a cautionary tale. Everyone knows he was framed, except the people who matter." Caleb studied her face, searching for a crack in her armor. "Framed or incompetent? History is written by the victors, Miss Miller, and right now I intend to be the victor in my own deal. If you help me close this merger with the Americans tonight, I'll pay you $50,000. Cash, no questions asked about your fake ID." $50,000. That was rent for 3 years. That was a new identity. That was freedom. "And if I refuse?" "Then I turn you over to the FBI for identity fraud," Caleb said calmly, leaning back. "And given your knowledge of sensitive maritime laws, they'll likely treat you as a foreign asset. You'll be in a holding cell by sunrise." It was blackmail, pure and simple. But as Audrey looked at him, she saw the desperation behind the threat. His hand was shaking slightly as he reached for his water bottle. He was terrified of losing his company, his legacy. He was a man on a cliff edge, grabbing whatever branch he could find. "I'll do it," Audrey said, "but not for 50,000. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Greedy, I like that." "How much?" 100,000, Audrey said firmly. "And you help me get a passport, a real one." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "Deal. But if you double-cross me, Audrey, there isn't a place on earth you'll be able to hide." She took his hand. His grip was warm, firm and electric. As they shook, the car slowed down, pulling up to the curb of a monolithic glass tower that pierced the Manhattan sky. The Al-Fayed Tower. "Welcome to the lion's den," Caleb muttered as the door opened. The penthouse was less a home and more a museum of loneliness. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that never slept. But the interior was cold. Black marble floors, steel furniture, and abstract art that looked like violent slashes of paint. Caleb tossed his jacket onto a couch that cost more than a car, and marched toward a massive mahogany desk dominated by 3 computer monitors. "Gideon!" Caleb shouted. A man stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. Gideon was a mountain of a man, the head of Caleb's security. He had a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Audrey with immediate suspicion. "Who is the girl?" Gideon asked, his voice gravelly. "The new consultant," Caleb said, sitting at his desk and waking up the screens. "She needs a laptop and access to the encrypted drive for the Jeddah files. Vetted access only. She doesn't leave this room." Gideon didn't move. "Sir, with all due respect, we have a meeting with Grant Holloway in 2 hours. You can't bring a waitress into a negotiation with Holloway. He'll eat her alive." "Holloway is a bully," Caleb said, typing rapidly. "And bullies don't like surprises. She is the surprise." Audrey stood in the middle of the room, feeling out of place in her stained waitress uniform. She looked around, trying to find something human in this cold space. Her eyes landed on a small table in the corner. On it sat a beautiful, hand-carved wooden chess set. The pieces were made of ivory and obsidian. The game was in progress, mid-play. She walked over to it, drawn by the familiar pattern. It was a complex position. White was aggressive, pushing for a checkmate, but black had a subtle, hidden defense. "Don't touch that," Caleb snapped from his desk. "I'm playing a correspondence game with a grandmaster in Russia. I've been stuck on that move for 3 days." Audrey studied the board. The white queen was overextended. The knight on f6 was a distraction. "You're going to lose," Audrey said quietly. Caleb stopped typing. The room went silent. Gideon looked at her as if she had just pulled the pin on a grenade. Caleb spun his chair around. "Excuse me." "You're playing white," Audrey said, pointing to the board. "You're attacking the king's side because you think he's weak there. But you missed the bishop on the long diagonal. In 3 moves, he's going to fork your king and queen. It's a classic trap. The Petrov counter-gambit, modified." Caleb stood up and walked over to the board. He stared at the pieces. He traced the line Audrey had mentioned. His eyes widened. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "Bishop to b7, he muttered. "Then knight to... Damn it." He looked at Audrey with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. "You play?" "My father taught me," Audrey said, a sad smile touching her lips. "He said life is just chess without the turn-taking. You have to see 10 moves ahead." "Who was your father?" Caleb asked, his voice softer this time. "A man who lost his game," Audrey deflected. "Now, about these files. If Grant Holloway is coming in 2 hours, we don't have time for chess. Holloway made his fortune by buying distressed companies and stripping them for parts. If he's meeting you, he thinks you're distressed." Caleb looked at her, the chessboard forgotten. He nodded slowly. "He knows about the liquidity issue at the port. He's coming to offer a buyout, a hostile one." "Then we need to make him think you don't need the money," Audrey said, her mind shifting into high gear. The adrenaline of the deal was coming back to her, the thrill she hadn't felt since her life fell apart. "Show me the contract he sent over." Caleb gestured to the computer. "Gideon, get her a tablet, and get her some clothes. She can't negotiate a multi-million-dollar defense in a polyester apron." For the next hour, the penthouse transformed into a war room. Audrey, now wearing a sleek, oversized white shirt and black trousers borrowed from Caleb's ex-girlfriend's emergency stash in the guest closet, sat on the floor with papers spread out around her. Caleb sat at the desk, fielding calls. They worked in a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Caleb would bark out a figure. Audrey would cross-reference it with international trade laws on her tablet. "He's undervaluing the fleet," Audrey said, circling a paragraph in red ink on the digital screen. "Clause 14, Section B. He's valuing the ships at scrap value, not operational value. That's a difference of 40 million. He's counting on me not reading the fine print because I'm desperate," Caleb growled. "He's also trying to trigger a default clause," Audrey pointed out. "Look here. If the port transfer is delayed by more than 24 hours, the lender assumes control of the assets. He knows about the bribe in Jeddah. He probably arranged it." Caleb froze. He looked at Audrey. "You think Holloway paid the port authority to hold my ships?" "It's what I would do if I wanted to crush you," Audrey said simply. "It's a pincer move. Choke your cash flow, then offer a lifeline that's actually a noose." Caleb looked at her, his eyes intense. "You're terrifying." "I'm effective," she corrected. "Sir," Gideon interrupted from the elevator monitor. "Grant Holloway is here, and he brought his lawyers." Caleb stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Audrey. She was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, her hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing clothes that didn't fit her. "Get up," Caleb said. Audrey scrambled to her feet. "What do you want me to do? Hide in the kitchen?" "No," Caleb said, walking over to her. He reached out and adjusted the collar of the oversized shirt, his fingers brushing her neck. A jolt of electricity went through her. "You're coming into the conference room. You're my new chief strategy officer." "I'm a waitress," she whispered. "Not tonight," Caleb said, his voice fierce. "Tonight you are the woman who saw the checkmate before I did. Just follow my lead. And when I give the signal, destroy him." The conference room was an extension of the penthouse's aggressive minimalism. A long glass table sat under a chandelier that looked like exploding ice. Seated at the head of the table was Grant Holloway. Holloway was a man who looked like he had been tanned in a leather factory. He was in his 50s, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Flanking him were two lawyers who looked like Dobermans waiting for a command. "Caleb!" Holloway boomed as they entered, not standing up. "I was beginning to think you'd jumped off the balcony." "Grant," Caleb said coolly, taking the seat opposite him. "Always a pleasure to see a vulture circling. Means there's meat on the bones." Holloway laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Then his eyes slid to Audrey, who sat to Caleb's right. "And who is this? I didn't know you brought dates to business executions." "This is Ms. Miller," Caleb said, not missing a beat. "My external consultant for Middle Eastern trade." Holloway sneered. "Consultant? Right. Well, let's cut the chase, Caleb. My sources tell me your ships are rotting in Jeddah. You're bleeding cash. I'm prepared to offer you 80 cents on the dollar for the shipping division. It's a generous offer. It saves you from bankruptcy." One of the lawyers slid a thick document across the table. "Sign here, Mr. Al-Fayed. We can have the funds wired by morning." Caleb looked at the contract, then at Audrey. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Audrey leaned forward. She didn't look at the contract. She looked directly at Holloway. "Mr. Holloway," Audrey said, her voice steady and clear. "Does the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act mean anything to you?" Holloway blinked. The smile faltered. "Excuse me." "The FCPA," Audrey repeated. "It makes it a federal crime for a U.S. citizen to bribe a foreign official to retain business. Now, Assuming you didn't personally pay the port director in Jeddah to hold Mr. Al-Fayed's ships, you certainly benefited from it. But if the transaction logs, which we have requested from the Saudi Interior Ministry, show a transfer from one of your shell companies, say, Blue Horizon Ventures. It was a bluff, a massive, terrifying bluff. Audrey remembered the name Blue Horizon from a magazine article about Holloway years ago. She had no idea if he used it for this, but Holloway's face went grey. The lawyer next to him stiffened. "That's slander," the lawyer snapped. "It's only slander if it's untrue," Audrey said, leaning back and crossing her arms. "We also noticed Clause 14 regarding the valuation of the fleet. You valued the Al-Hada at scrap prices, but the Al-Hada was retrofitted last month with new navigation systems worth $5 million alone. That omission constitutes fraud in the inducement of a contract." She picked up the contract Holloway had slid over, ripped it in half, and dropped the pieces on the glass table. "Mr. Al-Fayed is not selling," Audrey said. "However, since you are here, we are willing to discuss a partnership. You release the hold on the port, however you manage that, and we will allow you to invest as a minority partner. Non-voting shares only." The silence in the room was deafening. Caleb watched Audrey with a look of pure fascination. He had unleashed a weapon he didn't fully understand, and it was magnificent. Holloway stared at Audrey. His hands were clenched into fists on the table. "You little—" "Careful, Grant," Caleb warned, his voice low and dangerous. "She's right. If we go to the authorities with our suspicion about the port bribe, the investigation alone will freeze your assets. Can you afford that right now? I hear your Asian expansion is fragile." Holloway looked between Caleb and Audrey. He realized he had walked into a trap. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're playing a dangerous game, Caleb," Holloway spat. "And you—" He pointed a thick finger at Audrey. "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, you'll regret crossing me." "We accept your resignation from the deal," Audrey said calmly. Holloway stormed out, his lawyers scrambling to collect their papers and follow him. The heavy doors slammed shut. For a moment, neither Caleb nor Audrey moved. Then, Caleb let out a long breath and slumped back in his chair. He looked at Audrey and broke into a grin, a real, genuine grin that made him look 10 years younger. "Blue Horizon Ventures?" Caleb asked. "Did you know that for a fact?" "I guessed," Audrey admitted, her hands finally starting to tremble beneath the table. "He owns a yacht named Blue Horizon. Men like him lack imagination." Caleb laughed aloud. It was a rich, warm sound. "You are incredible. You just saved the company. Again." He stood up and walked over to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to Audrey. "To the best $100,000 I've ever spent." Audrey took the glass. She felt dizzy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. "Does this mean I can go?" Caleb's expression sobered. He took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Go." "Audrey, the night is just beginning. Holloway will retaliate, and now he's seen your face. You can't go back to your apartment. It's not safe." "What?" Audrey panicked. "No, the deal was—" "The deal has changed," Caleb said, setting his glass down. He walked around the table, closing the distance between them. "You made an enemy of a shark tonight. If you walk out that door, he will hunt you down just to spite me. You have to stay here. Stay here, in the penthouse. I have 5 guest bedrooms, and Gideon is the best security in the city." Caleb paused, his gaze softening. "Besides, I still need you to teach me how to get out of that chess trap." It was a clumsy excuse to keep her close, and they both knew it. But before Audrey could argue, The intercom buzzed. "Sir," Gideon's voice was urgent. "We have a problem." "What is it?" Caleb asked, annoyed. "I ran a deeper facial recognition scan on Ms. Miller, as per standard protocol for anyone staying overnight," Gideon said. Audrey's blood ran cold. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. "And?" Caleb asked, his eyes locking onto Audrey's terrified face. "The software got a hit from an Interpol database," Gideon said. "It's a 6-year-old photo, but it's a match. Sir, her name isn't Audrey Miller. It's Audrey Sterling. She's the daughter of Richard Sterling, the man who stole the State Department encryption keys." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Caleb stared at her, the warmth vanishing from his eyes, replaced by a look of betrayal. "Sterling," Caleb whispered. "Your father didn't just write a thesis on loopholes, Audrey. My company lost millions in the scandal he caused. He's the reason my father had a heart attack." Audrey backed away, crunching on the broken glass. "Caleb, I can explain." "You're not a waitress," Caleb said, stepping over the shattered glass, advancing on her. "You're the daughter of the man who almost destroyed my family. Did you plan this? Was the restaurant a setup?" "No, I didn't know," Audrey cried, hitting the wall. "Gideon!" Caleb barked into the intercom. "Lock the elevators. No one leaves." He planted his hands on the wall on either side of her head, trapping her. His face was inches from hers, his eyes blazing with fury and conflict. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't hand you over to the feds right now," he hissed. Audrey looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. She had saved him twice tonight, and now she was back to being the enemy. "Because," she whispered, her voice trembling, "because my father was innocent, and I have the drive that proves it. But if you turn me in, the real people who stole your father's money, the people who own Grant Holloway, will kill me." Caleb froze. "The drive? You have the Sterling drive?" "I do," she lied. She didn't have it. It was lost years ago. But she needed a lifeline. And I can give it to you. But you have to protect me. Caleb stared at her, searching for the truth in her beautiful, terrified eyes. He hated that he wanted to believe her. He hated that even now, furious as he was, the scent of her hair was intoxicating him. "You have until morning," Caleb said, pulling back abruptly. "Prove you have the data, or I destroy you myself." He turned and stormed out of the conference room, leaving Audrey alone with the broken glass and the ghost of her past. The guest bedroom was luxurious, wrapped in silk and velvet, but to Audrey it felt like a prison cell. She paced the floor, the shards of her past cutting deeper than the glass she had stepped on earlier. She had lied. She didn't have the drive. The Sterling drive, the mythical hard drive her father was rumored to have hidden before his arrest, was lost when their house in Cairo was raided. All she had was her memory, and a terrifying ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. She looked at the digital clock. 3 a.m. Caleb had given her until morning. The door handle turned. Audrey froze. Caleb walked in. He had discarded his jacket and tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the stress that was eating him alive. He held 2 tumblers of scotch. He didn't look furious anymore. He looked haunted. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice rough. He set 1 glass down on the nightstand. "I keep thinking about the day my father died. The news broke about the data leak. The stock plummeted, and his heart just stopped. I blamed your father for 6 years. I hated the name Sterling." "My father didn't do it, Caleb," Audrey said softly, not moving from the window. "He was the scapegoat. He found out that a shadow consortium was siphoning money from the US aid funds, and funneling it through your father's shipping lanes without his knowledge. When he tried to report it, they framed him to cover their tracks. Caleb looked at her, searching for the lie but finding only exhaustion. And you? The waitress who speaks the dialect of kings. How much of your life is a performance? All of it, she whispered. Except tonight. Helping you. That was real. I was tired of being invisible. Caleb crossed the room. The air between them crackled with a tension that had shifted from anger to something far more dangerous. He stopped inches from her. I want to believe you, he murmured. God help me, Audrey. I want to trust you. But in my world, trust gets you killed. Then don't trust me, Audrey said, her breath hitching as his hand came up to cup her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Trust my moves. Look at the board, Caleb. Who benefits if we both go down? Holloway. Holloway is a thug, but he's not smart enough to frame a diplomat, Caleb said, his eyes dropping to her lips. He has help, Audrey whispered. The moment stretched, suspended in time. Caleb leaned in, his resistance crumbling. He kissed her, not gently, but with the desperation of a man who had been alone in a crowded room for too long. It was a kiss that tasted of scotch and rain and danger. Audrey melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself in the storm. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Then, the lights went out. The penthouse plunged into total darkness. The electronic hum of the building died instantly. Caleb pulled back, his instincts shifting instantly from lover to protector. The power grid, the backup generator should have kicked in instantly. Why didn't it? Audrey asked, her voice trembling. Because someone disabled it manually, Caleb said, grabbing her hand. We're not safe. The door to the bedroom kicked open. A beam of tactical light cut through the darkness. Mr. Al-Fayed, a voice boomed from the hallway. It wasn't Holloway, it was Gideon. Gideon? Caleb called out, stepping in front of Audrey. What's going on? Get the emergency lights on. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. Gideon's voice was calm, devoid of the loyalty he had feigned for years. Mr. Holloway sends his regards. He was very impressed with your new consultant. He wants her, and he wants you. Removed. Caleb stiffened. You work for him. After 10 years, Gideon. 10 years of watching you play king while I cleaned up your messes? Gideon stepped into the room, a silhouetted gun in his hand. 2 other men in tactical gear stood behind him. Holloway offered me a seat at the table. All I have to do is hand over the girl and make your death look like a suicide. Stress of the failed merger, they'll say. Audrey, run, Caleb whispered. Where? She hissed back. We're on the 50th floor. The bathroom, Caleb said. Ventilation shaft. I'm not leaving you, she said. How touching, Gideon sneered. He raised the gun. Wait, Audrey screamed. Don't shoot. I have the Sterling drive. If you kill us, you'll never find it. It's encrypted with a biometric key. Only I have. Gideon paused. Greed flickered in the darkness. The Sterling drive contained blackmail material on half the Fortune 500. It was worth more than Caleb's company. Where is it? Gideon demanded. It's in the panic room safe, Caleb lied smoothly, catching on to Audrey's play. I locked it away when she gave it to me. Gideon lowered the gun slightly. Open it. Both of you move to the hallway. Slowly. Caleb squeezed Audrey's hand. 3 short pulses. Get ready. They walked into the hallway, hands raised. Gideon and his mercenaries followed. As they passed the heavy oak table in the foyer, the one with the chess set, Caleb stumbled. Move! Gideon barked. My leg! Caleb groaned, falling to one knee near the table. Get up! Gideon stepped forward, distracted. Caleb looked up, his eyes meeting Audrey's. "Checkmate." He grabbed the heavy wooden chessboard and hurled it with all his strength into Gideon's face. The board shattered, sending heavy obsidian pieces flying like shrapnel. Gideon howled, stumbling back, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. "Run!" Caleb roared. He tackled the mercenary to his right. Audrey didn't freeze. She grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the console table and swung it at the second mercenary's knee. A sickening crunch echoed, and the man went down. "To the office!" Caleb shouted, grabbing Audrey's arm. They bolted down the corridor as Gideon recovered, blood streaming down his face. Bullets tore into the drywall around them, exploding in puffs of white dust. They threw themselves into Caleb's office. Caleb slammed the heavy reinforced door and punched a code into the keypad. The steel bolts slammed home, just as a heavy body slammed against the other side. "Open up!" Gideon screamed from the other side. "I'll burn this place down!" Caleb slumped against the door, breathing hard. Blood was seeping from a graze on his arm. "Are you hit?" Audrey asked, rushing to him, tearing a strip from the oversized shirt she was wearing to bind the wound. "Just a scratch," Caleb winced. "But we have a problem. This door is bulletproof, but Gideon has the override codes. He can cut through the electronic lock in about 10 minutes. "We need to call the police," Audrey said, reaching for the desk phone. "Line is dead," Caleb said. He jammed the signal. "We're trapped." Audrey looked at the computer monitors. They were dark. No power. "Does the internal server have an independent power source?" Audrey asked, her mind racing. "Yes, a localized battery for the trading algorithms. It lasts 1 hour." "Turn it on," Audrey commanded, sitting at the desk. "Why? We can't call out." "No," Audrey said, her eyes blazing with a sudden realization. "But we can broadcast. Gideon thinks I don't have the drive. I don't. But I have something better." She looked at the chessboard icon on Caleb's dead screen. "The correspondence game," she whispered. "The one you were playing with the Russian." "What about it?" Caleb asked, confused, turning on the battery backup. The screens flickered to life. "It wasn't a game, Caleb," Audrey said, typing furiously. "I recognized the pattern earlier. The moves weren't chess moves. E4, D5, knight to F3. They correspond to sector coordinates of your shipping containers. Someone was using the chat function of that chess app to coordinate the smuggling. They were using your own account to do it." Caleb stared at her. "You mean?" "I mean the evidence of the smuggling, the bribery, the theft. It's all in the chat logs of your chess game. Gideon and Holloway were using it right under your nose." The drilling sound started at the door. Sparks flew. Gideon was cutting the lock. "We have maybe 5 minutes," Caleb said, checking his watch. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to access the archives," Audrey said. "But the server is locked. What's the admin password?" Caleb hesitated. "It's biometric, my fingerprint." He pressed his thumb to the scanner. "Access denied." "He locked me out," Caleb cursed. "Gideon revoked my admin rights." "Think, Caleb," Audrey cried. "Is there a back door, a developer override?" "Only the original creator of the system has a back door," Caleb said. "My father." "But he's dead." Audrey went still. "Your father? Did he leave a phrase? A motto?" "No," Caleb shook his head. "Just numbers. He was a math genius." "Wait," Audrey said. "The shadow account thesis my father wrote. Your father read it? He was obsessed with it. He annotated every page." Audrey closed her eyes. "Page 42. The footnote. My father wrote a specific sequence of prime numbers that create a perfect encryption key. It was a theoretical, unhackable code. If your father respected mine, he might have used it." "Audrey, that's a shot in the dark," Caleb said. The door hinges were glowing red hot. "It's the only shot we have," she said. She began to type. Not words, but numbers. A sequence she had memorized as a child because her father used to sing it to her as a lullaby. 1009, 1013, 10 to 19. "Come on," she whispered. The door groaned. A hole appeared in the steel. Gideon's eye was visible, staring through. "I see you," Gideon hissed. Audrey hit enter. The screen froze. Then a green command prompt appeared. "Welcome, Administrator Al-Fayed." "You did it," Caleb breathed. "I'm uploading the entire chat history to the SEC, the FBI, and the New York Times," Audrey said, her fingers flying. "And I'm live streaming the security camera feed from inside this room to your company's public YouTube channel." "The camera?" Caleb looked up at the lens in the corner. "Smile, Gideon," Audrey said loudly. "You're trending." The door burst open. Gideon stormed in, gun raised. "Goodbye, Caleb," he sneered. "Drop the gun, Gideon," Caleb shouted. "Look at the screen." Gideon glanced at the massive wall monitor. It showed a live feed of himself, gun in hand, with a viewer count ticking up rapidly. 1,500, 5,000, 12,000 watching, and below it, the scrolling text of the chat logs proving he had embezzled millions. "It's over," Caleb said. "The police are already on their way. The automated alarm for a live stream of a felony just triggered a Priority 1 response." Gideon's face went pale. He lowered the gun. He looked at the window, then at Caleb. He knew it was finished. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder every second. Audrey slumped back in the chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Caleb pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "You're brilliant," he whispered into her hair. "You're absolutely brilliant." 6 months later, the morning sun over Central Park was crisp and golden. The Gilded Lily was buzzing, but not with the usual lunch rush. Today it was closed for a private event. Audrey stood by the window, but she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a tailored cream suit that cost more than her old apartment building. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. "Nervous?" Audrey turned. Caleb stood there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked different, lighter, happier. The shadows were gone from his eyes. "A little," she admitted. "It's not every day you get your name back." "You earned it," Caleb said, handing her a glass. "The courts officially exonerated Richard Sterling this morning. The posthumous apology from the State Department is being broadcast in an hour." Audrey felt a lump in her throat. "I wish he could see this." "He sees it," Caleb said softly. "Through you." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. Gideon was in federal prison, negotiating a plea deal that involved giving up Grant Holloway. Holloway was out on bail, but his empire had collapsed. The Blue Horizon scandal had destroyed him. And Caleb had rebuilt. But he hadn't done it alone. "Audrey," he said, setting his glass down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Audrey's heart stopped. "Caleb? We make a good team," he said, opening the box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a custom-made chess piece, a queen carved from white gold. "I don't need a waitress. I don't need a consultant. I need a partner, a queen to my king." He looked at her with vulnerable, open love. "Will you run the company with me? Officially? As my CEO and my wife?" Audrey looked at the piece, then at the man who had seen her when the rest of the world looked right through her. She remembered the rain, the fear, the fake name tag, and she realized she didn't want to hide anymore. "Yes," she whispered, "but on one condition." Caleb laughed, sliding the ring. Wait, it was a ring on the chess piece, onto her finger. "Anything. No more secrets," she said, "and I get to play white in our next game." Deal, Caleb grinned, pulling her in for a kiss that was broadcast on every gossip site in New York by the next morning. Outside, the paparazzi flashed their cameras, but Audrey didn't flinch. The invisible woman was gone. The Queen had arrived, and this time she was playing for keeps. What a journey. From a trembling waitress hiding in plain sight to the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, Audrey proved that true power isn't about money. It's about intelligence, resilience, and the courage to speak up when everyone else stays silent. Caleb learned the hard way that you should never underestimate someone just because they're serving you water. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. It helps the channel so much. And I want to know your opinion in the comments. If you were Audrey, would you have forgiven Caleb for almost handing you over to the FBI? Or would you have taken the money and run? Let's argue in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss part 1 of our next dramatic saga. We have a story coming next week about a homeless man who is actually a disguised prince. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.